I've heard this story more times than I care to admit. And what stays with me is not the amount of money people lose, but how it all begins, quietly, without suspicion. Just an ordinary phone call ringing on a calm morning, no different from millions of other calls older adults receive every year. The voice on the other end is always composed, never rushed, never threatening. They say your name correctly, repeat personal details accurately, and then deliver the one message that lands hardest at that exact moment. Your account is at risk. There has been unusual activity. If this is not verified right now, your money could disappear within minutes. No one is asked to invest. No one is promised profit. Only a sense of urgency that feels real enough to push reason aside. I have met people like this. They are not foolish, they are not greedy. Most of them have lived carefully with money their entire lives. They saved so they would never become a burden to their children, and because of that, when they believe that money is under threat, they are willing to do anything to protect it, even if it means following instructions from a voice they have never met. My name is Dolan. On the Financial Secrets channel, I do not tell stories to frighten you. I tell them so you understand one critical truth. The most dangerous financial scams do not target greed. They target fear and trust. And older adults are the most vulnerable group. If you believe that you or your loved ones are careful enough to never fall into traps like these, I want you to stay. Because the story ahead is not about someone careless. It is about someone very similar to people you love, and how everything they built was taken by a phone call that seemed harmless. Before this story goes any further, there is something important you need to understand. The person I am about to describe is not a special case. He is not isolated from society, not uninformed, and not naive in the way people often imagine financial scam victims to be. If you met him in real life, you might see your parents, your neighbor, or even yourself a few decades from now. I will call him Robert. He is in his 70s and spent decades working in a stable profession. He never became wealthy quickly, but he earned enough to support his family and pay off the small home he still lives in today. After retirement, his life settled into a steady rhythm. Mornings begin with hot coffee, a few pages of the newspaper, and a slow walk around the familiar neighborhood. He does not chase technology, but he is not disconnected from it either. A smartphone allows him to stay in touch with his children, receive bank notifications, and manage what he needs. His finances are simple: a fixed monthly pension, a savings account built over many years, and no significant debt. To younger people, the amount may not seem large. To Robert, it represents security. Money for medical care if his health declines, money for heating during long winters, money that allows him to avoid calling his son to say he is struggling. When I speak to people like Robert, they often tell me the same thing. I do not need to get rich anymore. I just need to not lose what I already have. That belief makes them feel insulated from financial scams. They do not chase risky investments. They do not send money to strangers for high returns. They believe they are playing a safe game. Before the incident, there were no obvious warning signs, no major expenses, no reckless decisions, only subtle changes most of us would ignore. More unfamiliar phone calls, account alerts that looked legitimate, warnings that sounded reasonable enough not to question. For someone disciplined and accustomed to trusting institutions, these signals blended seamlessly into daily life. I have seen many people fall into this situation not because they were careless, but because they believed their caution was enough. They did not realize that scammers study how older adults think, what they fear, and who they trust. And they certainly did not realize that the most dangerous moment is not when money is transferred, but when someone believes they are doing the right thing to protect themselves. That is the setting in which the fateful call appears, not as a threat, but as timely help. And it is here that the story moves into its next phase, where decisions are driven by fear rather than reason. I want you to slow down and picture the moment things begin to shift, because in most cases I have studied, it never starts with a dramatic shock. It begins quietly. For Robert, the first contact was a brief, polite phone call at a reasonable hour. The caller claimed to be from the bank's security department and explained that the system had detected suspicious activity linked to his account. There was no accusation, no aggressive tone, just a warning that sounded exactly like what we expect a bank to provide. What held Robert's attention was not the information itself, but the delivery. The caller understood the rhythm of speaking to older adults. They spoke slowly, clearly, and paused often to let Robert respond. They reassured him repeatedly that they were there to help and that he could stop at any time if he felt uncomfortable. That patience created trust. In Robert's mind, this was not a stranger. It felt like part of the system he had relied on for decades. After the first call, nothing happened immediately. That detail matters. The scammer did not rush. They allowed time to pass, then called again with updates. Each interaction added a small piece of information that made the story sound more complete. A test transaction had been blocked. A suspicious IP address was detected. An attempted login from outside the country. The terminology was familiar, not overly technical, but convincing enough to feel legitimate. Trust is not built through one bold promise, it is built through consistency. Robert began to recognize the caller's name and voice. When the phone rang, the initial anxiety faded. He believed he was dealing with the same person and the same department. Once familiarity sets in, questions fade. Many victims later tell me this is where they lost their chance to stop. Once trust was established, action followed. The caller explained that to secure the account, Robert needed to verify his identity through a special process. Not by sending money away, but by temporarily transferring it to a safe account. The wording was careful. No mention of loss, no mention of giving, only protection. Robert hesitated briefly. Each time he did, the caller did not push. They simply reminded him that time was not on their side and that attackers could try again at any moment. Robert followed the instructions. He logged into his bank account, read verification codes aloud, and entered the requested numbers. In his mind, these were necessary steps to prevent a greater threat. He did not think he was handing control to someone else. He believed he was protecting himself. That is the exact moment when the line between safety and risk disappears. Small warning signs appeared along the way, requests that sounded slightly different from past experiences, vague answers when Robert asked detailed questions. But each doubt was quickly neutralized by familiar reassurance. The caller repeated that this was an emergency, that normal procedures were too slow, that everything was being done to prevent loss. Robert chose the feeling of safety over a faint sense of unease. The most dangerous phase was not the first transfer, but the period when everything seemed to work. No system errors, no alerts, everything looked normal. That reinforced Robert's belief that he had done the right thing. And when the caller suggested one final step to complete the protection process, Robert had no reason to refuse. He had gone too far to turn back. The human mind resists admitting error, especially when actions are taken in the name of safety. Only after the call ended and the house returned to silence did the unease settle in. Robert logged back into his account. The number on the screen was completely different. Not a small loss, but most of what he had saved over many years. No error messages, no technical warnings, just silence and a cold realization spreading through his body. In all the stories I have heard, this is the heaviest moment. Not because the money is gone, but because the person finally understands that throughout the entire process, they were never being protected. They were guided step by step, not through force, but through trust and very human fear. And once that realization sets in, many people simply sit still, wondering where they went wrong. The turning point did not arrive the moment the money disappeared. It came later, One afternoon, when Robert was still trying to convince himself this was only a temporary technical issue, he called the number that had contacted him before. No answer. He tried again. Silence. The unease now felt different. Not urgent, but heavy. Like the realization of having crossed too far from safety. Robert did what he should have done from the beginning. He called the bank directly using the number printed on his card. The call was transferred several times. When a real employee finally listened to his story, the tone shifted. The voice was no longer reassuring. It slowed down, careful and deliberate. He was told to stop all activity immediately, provide no more information, and visit the nearest branch at once. That was the first moment Robert understood that what he believed was protection might have been the opposite. At the branch, the pieces fell into place. The transfers he thought were temporary had been sent to accounts difficult to trace. The verification codes he shared had granted control to someone else. There was no security department calling customers that way. No emergency protection procedure like the one he was told about. Everything was a carefully constructed script, sophisticated but not uncommon. The truth did not need to be dramatic. Its weight was enough. Robert sat quietly for a long time. He did not cry. He did not react angrily. What showed most clearly on his face was emptiness. The question in his mind was not how much money remained, but how this could have happened to him. He replayed every step, every word, and with each memory came more self-blame. I have seen many people at this moment. The reaction is almost always the same. They are less angry at the scammers than at themselves for trusting. When Robert's son arrived, the room grew heavier. There were no accusations, no raised voices, only silence between people who understood that an invisible boundary had been crossed. Robert felt he had lost more than money. He had lost his sense of control, something he had valued his entire life. For an older adult, that loss cuts deeper than any number on a screen. The most painful part of this climax is not the exposure of the scammer. They rarely reveal themselves. The true peak lies in the victim seeing the full picture and realizing that all the warning signs were there, arranged just carefully enough to avoid suspicion. When Robert signed the incident report, his hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. A harmless sounding phone call had ended in a reality he never imagined facing at this stage of life. The consequences did not end at the bank branch. For Robert, that was only the beginning of a long and heavy period of adjustment. The money lost was not everything, but it was enough to shatter the sense of security he had built over decades. A small portion was traced with bank assistance, but most was gone beyond recovery. When the final numbers were confirmed, the room fell silent in a different way. No more fragile hope, only acceptance. In the days that followed, Robert rarely left his house. His sleep was shallow, his appetite uneven. He often sat for long periods staring at the old ledger where every expense had once been carefully recorded. The numbers no longer offered control. I have seen people at this stage fall into two extremes: panic, trying to fix everything at once, or paralysis, avoiding all financial decisions. Robert leaned toward the latter. He feared touching money at all. Family became his anchor. His son did not lecture or blame. He sat with Robert and reviewed the financial situation calmly. Together, they rebuilt structure. Monthly expenses were reassessed. Non-essential costs were reduced without harming health or daily living. Some funds were moved into accounts with limited transaction access. These steps did not restore what was lost, but they returned a measure of agency. Recovery did not happen quickly. There was no triumphant moment. It was like learning to walk again after a hard fall. Each decision required more thought. Robert began sharing his story with a few friends his age, at first out of embarrassment, later out of realization that he was not alone. Some listeners grew quiet because they saw themselves in his experience. Speaking did not erase the pain, but it stopped the silent self-blame. The greatest change was not in the balance of his account, but in how Robert viewed money and safety. He no longer believed personal caution alone was enough. He understood that systems can be exploited and trust manipulated. He learned to involve others in important decisions. For someone who had been independent his entire life, that shift was difficult but necessary. When I met Robert again months later, he looked a bit older, but his eyes were lighter. He did not say he had fully moved on. He said he had accepted it. For many victims, that acceptance is already a major step forward. They do not try to forget the story. They learn to live with it, armed with greater awareness and a new understanding of risks that once felt distant. There is one sentence I hear more than any other from people like Robert. Once things settle, I wish I had known sooner. Not richer, not smarter, just more aware of how these scams actually work. Because in hindsight, very few say they were convinced by a tempting promise. Most say they were carried away by fear and the feeling of doing the right thing. The first lesson is this: financial scams targeting older adults do not exploit greed. They exploit responsibility. Responsibility to oneself, to family, to lifelong savings. When someone believes their money is in danger, they act faster, question less, and accept things they never would in calm conditions. The second lesson is that no legitimate financial situation requires immediate action over the phone. This is something many realize too late. Reputable institutions operate with clear processes, time, and multiple verification layers. Anyone creating urgency and insisting on immediate decisions is trying to control emotions before thinking begins. Time, in these moments, is the strongest protection. A simple but powerful rule I always repeat is to never handle serious financial matters based on a single source. No matter how convincing the voice sounds, stop, hang up, call back using a number you know is legitimate. If someone refuses to allow that step, the answer is already clear. Financial safety never conflicts with verification. Robert's story also reveals something many older adults struggle to accept. Absolute independence can be a risk. When financial decisions are kept private, no one else can question them or notice warning signs. Sharing control, or at least sharing information, is not weakness. It is an added layer of protection in an increasingly complex world. If you are listening and think this does not apply to you, pause. You may not be older, but your parents might be, or someone you care about. These scams are quiet. They leave little trace until everything is done. Many victims never speak up due to shame or fear of judgment. The greatest lesson I have learned from witnessing these stories is this: financial safety is not just about how much money you have, but about the boundaries you place around your emotions. When you slow down, verify, and allow others to be involved in important decisions, you create an advantage scammers fear. Not because you outsmart them, but because you refuse to move at their pace. If you have listened this far, take a moment to think about the people you care about most. Your parents, your grandparents, a loved one living alone who feels confident they still have everything under control. Stories like Robert's do not end with public scandals. They end quietly, with shame and loss that many never speak about, allowing others to become the next victims. You do not need to be a financial expert to make a difference. Have one calm conversation. Tell your loved ones that no legitimate organization will ask them to verify accounts or move money over the phone. Agree on one simple rule. If any call involves money, they hang up and call you before doing anything else. These small steps may not recover lost money, but they can stop another story from beginning. If you found this story valuable, share it. Not to spread fear, but awareness. Many older adults do not follow financial news or official warnings, but they listen to their children. One share can become protection you never expected. On Financial Secrets, I will continue telling stories like this, not to judge right or wrong, but to help you see the risks hidden behind decisions that seem small. If you want to understand how money, psychology, and invisible traps shape our lives, stay with me. In the next episode, I will tell you about a federal agency impersonation scam that drained retirement funds from thousands of people in just weeks. And if you believe you would recognize that trap immediately, you may want to hear that story before it's too late.